Welcome back in. Hope all of you are having fantastic Tuesdays wherever you may be across this great country or this great land. We are here in the Geico OutKick studios, and one of the most intriguing stories to follow anywhere in the world of college football has been what's going on in the larger context with the coaching carousel, particularly as it pertains to COVID existing right now, and how all of that is going to impact the offseason. And one of the biggest stories there has been at Texas. So we bring in now Chip Brown from horns247.com, who has been following the Urban Meyer pursuit pretty much as close as he possibly can. Chip, thanks for getting up with us and rolling here in OutKick this morning. Let's just kind of break this down in a larger context here. What are you hearing about the Texas job? How safe is Tom Herman? And what in the world's going on with Urban Meyer?
Yeah, I mean, it's never a dull moment when Texas big money donors get an idea about a new football coach. And this started back in October when Texas looked bad against TCU and in a home loss, and then in a 4 overtime loss against Oklahoma. The team wasn't standing together for the post game tradition of the Eyes of Texas, the school song. And the big money guys, and really the fan base in general, I've never seen a fuse turn more quickly against a head coach than it did against Tom Herman. And those big money guys went to the administration and said, you all need to, look and see if Urban Meyer would be interested in coaching. He's a free agent. He doesn't have a buyout. And so that's when it started back in October. And yeah, I think Urban Meyer has, he wavered back and forth. Obviously, I think Texas felt like they still had a chance, even, going into last week. But I was told over the weekend that Meyer has indicated to them that he's not interested in getting back into the college game because of his health reasons, the arachnoid cyst on his brain lining, and also concern about the new climate with the transfer portal and, the likelihood of a one and done or a one-time transfer rule that would come on board in 2021. And so it ended. The flirtation with Urban Meyer, I'm told, has come to an end. And now, there's a real possibility Tom Herman could stay on as head coach because there's a $25 million buyout here. There's $15 million for Herman and $9.6 million for his staff. And if you're going to have a chance at Urban Meyer, that's one thing. But there's really no consensus on Plan B. And so, here Texas is. They figured, what? Let's go see if we can, reel in a guy who's won 3 national championships, and sounding like Urban Meyer's not getting back into the college game this go-around.
So where does that leave the relationship between Texas and Tom Herman? When basically they have gone out and it eventually went public that there was a flirtation here going on with Urban Meyer, kind of eerily similar, and I'll ask you about that a little bit with Nick Saban, and then it doesn't end up coming to fruition. So does Texas kind of go back to Tom Herman hat in hand and say, our bad? Because this seems like it's impacted recruiting. It seems like it's impacted the ability of Tom Herman to sell to anybody out there that the university is completely committed to him.
Well, I think recruiting was hurting before the Urban Meyer flirtation really got public. And, Herman had it going there for a minute. He won 3 games in a row. If he'd have beaten Iowa State after having a 10-point lead midway through the third quarter, after seeing what they did to K-State last weekend, they probably, and then one final game on the road at Kansas, they probably would have been in the Big 12 championship game against Oklahoma. But they lost that game to Iowa State. And Tom Herman made a couple of questionable decisions on 4th down in that game that sort of led to that 10-point lead unraveling. And so I think it's awkward. I mean, there's no 2 ways around it, and everybody's going to have to just, soldier on and hope that Tom Herman and his new staff, I mean, he hired 7 new assistants before this season, can get it going and hope that this, the pandemic, Tom Herman couldn't have timed that any worse. Bring in 7 new assistants, and then a month later, we're in a global pandemic. So his new assistants didn't get out on the road recruiting and have the kind of face-to-face relationships with players, recruits that he needs. And they got to hope that starts to, change, because he's going to have to fight uphill out of this thing. It's not ideal. There's no question about that. And, signing day is the 16th. Texas has the 17th ranked recruiting class after 3 straight top 10 classes. You and I both know it's about players. And so Tom Herman, who's done a good job, bringing in grad transfers and that kind of thing, he's just going to have to put the best face on this thing possible, and then hope that new staff can get it going.
We're talking to Chip Brown of horns247.com. You mentioned the Eyes of Texas controversy. I've read a bit about that, but I haven't paid a lot of attention to it. And I would imagine that a lot of my listeners haven't paid a lot of attention to it either, if they're not Texas fans. What is that story?
Yeah, so the Eyes of Texas is a 100-year school song that, even some professors on campus teach in their, Black History class, that the song was introduced at a minstrel show on campus back in 1903. And so when, the social protests emerged over the summer after George Floyd's death, 149 student organizations asked for change on campus, and one of the changes was replacing the school song. Well, the school president said, we're not going to replace the school song. We're going to do a full, research into the history of the origins of the song. We will own the origins, but we will, talk about the lyrics in the song that bring this university together. And so, that has been greeted lukewarmly by some, obviously African-American student athletes on campus. And athletic director Chris Del Conte said, hey, we're not asking you to sing the song, but we do want the teams to stand together. So however you all want to do that.
Because they play this at the end of the game as sort of a way for the students at the games, right? For people out there who may not be aware, that's kind of a tradition, not kind of a tradition, but it's a tradition at Texas to play that song at the end of games.
That's right. And it's a way to thank the fans for being there and celebrate their university together. And so I say all the teams, volleyball and, the other sports were together, and football wasn't. And according to the coaches I spoke to, the athletic director, Chris Del Conte, said exactly what I told you. Hey, don't have to sing it, but we would like everyone standing together so it doesn't look like the team is divided. Well, Tom Herman said he would handle it, and then the Oklahoma game happened where Sam Ellinger's out on the field by himself, basically, or in a photograph with no other teammates around and singing the Eyes of Texas. The optics were terrible. The donors and the fan base went nuts on Tom Herman because they felt like, oh my gosh, he's lost the team. Well, no, he just didn't have them organized for that post-game playing of the Eyes. And it was sort of a perfect storm of bad optics, bad football. And at that moment, there were a bunch of big money donors who were just done, went to the administration, said, you all really need to go look into Urban Meyer. And that's when it started. To Herman's credit, the team, improved as the season went on. And as I said, if not for a couple questionable decisions in the Iowa State game, maybe they hang on to the 10-point lead in the third quarter and they're in the Big 12 championship. But it was rough in October, and that's where this all started.
We're talking to Chip Brown. You can read him at horns247.com, talking about some of the drama down in Texas with Tom Herman. Now, behind the scenes, there's a lot of tension between Urban Meyer and Tom Herman over the Zach Smith controversy, the former Ohio State wide receivers coach, and who exactly might have been the source for those stories that popped and trailed Urban in his final year at Ohio State. Does that play in at all to this pursuit of Urban Meyer, that relationship between Urban Meyer and Tom Herman, or is that not a significant aspect? I mean, in other words, nobody wants to be replaced, but was it particularly galling to Tom Herman that the guy they were talking about replacing him with was Urban Meyer?
I mean, it had to have been, because there is bad blood between the two over exactly what you just said. And, I've had people say, do you think Urban, dragged this out without giving Texas a question or an answer about his interest in getting back into coaching, to make sure that Tom Herman, felt that and was diminished by it. And I don't know. I don't know Urban Meyer well enough to know if that is, something that he would think of doing, but there's no question that ended up being what happened, because Tom Herman had to hear about this for a couple of weeks. His team had to hear about it. Obviously, recruits had to hear about it. And it's still not, I think the administration and Texas Athletic Director Chris Del Conte, who I think if you poured truth serum in him, he probably would not have ventured into this, flirtation with Urban Meyer. I think it came more from, the big money guys in the administration. And so, I think right now they're leaning toward bringing Herman back, unless, a candidate emerges here that just blows them away to the tune of a $25 million buyout.
Is there anybody else that is out there? I mean, you hear Matt Campbell. Obviously, you mentioned that Iowa State game that Matt Campbell ended up winning. You hear maybe James Franklin, a couple of different names maybe kind of hinted around about that Texas job. But obviously, I think it's fair to say none of those guys have the same cachet as Urban Meyer. Is there anybody else that they could get that would have them make the move to get rid of Tom Herman?
Yeah, I mean, if there is, Chris Del Conte is going to have to convince the president and the regents that whoever it is, whether it's the guys you just mentioned, who I think Texas has researched in the time that this has also been going on with Urban Meyer. I think they've done some research into guys like Matt Campbell and Steve Sarkisian and Mario Cristobal and James Franklin. But I just don't get the sense that the president and the regents are going to be able to justify the $25 million buyout for any of the names we just mentioned.
We're talking to Chip Brown. You can go read him at horns247.com. Appreciate him rolling in here with us at OutKick. Okay, last question for you. How much of this has to do with Lincoln Riley having things rolling at Oklahoma, and with the Aggies, even though we just found out that their game against Ole Miss is not going to happen this weekend, but theoretically they have a chance to get to 8-1 and be on kind of the outside looking in, I think, before all is said and done, in the playoff race, but certainly up there around the top 5 or top 6. College football isn't just about how you're doing. One of the things that makes it so great is the rivalries. And you've got two different rivals that are doing pretty well right now, while Texas has not.
Yeah, well, at the time, it was the OU loss that dropped Herman to 1-4 against Oklahoma, that was also sitting in the craw of the big money guys and ultimately the administration. A&M has gone on to, beat Florida and have a season where they're on the verge of the college football playoff. But it's definitely more the Oklahoma 1-4 record against Oklahoma, 1-3 against TCU. So that's what was rubbing, the powers that be the wrong way when this flirtation with Meyer began.
Good stuff as always. Chip Brown, he's at horns247.com. We'll see what happens. Maybe we'll get you back on if they end up making a choice to move on from Tom Herman. I know it'd be exciting and also crazy for your business to be chasing it down. But Chip, have a good holiday season, my man. Appreciate you coming on.